God, Kruchik isn't. Hello and welcome to the special edition of FOF Live presented by you, super subscribers. And on this edition of FOF Live, we'll be talking about the winter meetings, the big signing within the division on Juan Soto, and a little more to discuss, especially with this draft lottery. As you can tell, I just woke up from a nap. I have zero clue what is happening from this draft lottery aside from the fact that Nats won. That's all I know. All I know is the Nationals won. It's another big day for the NL East. Again, we are here joined by Kevin, Nate, Isaac, Eli, Sean. We have Alex Kruchik, who is in Dallas. I don't know if he'll be joining us or get Twitter from him or whatnot, but he is boots in the ground in Dallas. And Eli, please take it away.
Yes. So just moments ago, the full lottery results were revealed live on MLB Network. The Marlins could not fall any lower than 8th, and they had tied for the best possible odds of winning the lottery. You spoiled the latter part. They did not win the lottery. In the division, the Nats again have a number 1 overall pick, as they did a couple times in the not too distant past, and those picks turned out to be a crucial difference in the organization. The Marlins still have not had the first overall pick 25 years and counting since the only time they picked number 1 overall. But the chances were pretty good that they would get top 2, almost a lock that they would get top 5, right? But as it turns out,
no,
the draft order is in. As my lighting just fell down, I think that's an omen. So I don't know how things are going. Miami Marlins are going to pick 7th in the draft lottery.
Almost 7?
As things could have gone, dropped. They were surpassed by the Twins, by the Cardinals, by teams that have winning records, have jumped past them. So coming off one of the worst seasons in franchise history, having lost 100 games, having been out of contention basically from the word go, their reward is that they're all the way down at number 7, basically where they were just 3 years ago when they picked Jacob Berry. That was the number 6 overall pick. So it's their highest draft position in 3 years, but one of the worst seasons in franchise history at a time where they desperately need an infusion of more young talent into the organization. They're going to have to twiddle their thumbs as 6 other teams ahead of them get the first crack at next year's draft.
Oh my God. Oh my, 7th? There's 6 people right now in the live. That means the next person that joins us is the 7th, and that's how far the Marlins are. Oh my God. No Ethan Holiday, no Jay Slavette. This is the worst possible scenario. You could say the Marlins maybe deserve this, the way they kind of treated last season and the way that they've been handling things as of late, especially with the new rules of tanking. You know, the A's on top. I don't even know what's another team that didn't get it. But there were 2 teams. The A's and one of them.
White Sox.
The A's and White Sox, thank you. And there, I believe, right in around 10, 12 range, Marlins got 7th. The lowest the possible one was 8th. So they got 7. Not in the top 5. I don't know any of the top prospects. Marlins, we're going to have to keep looking. Wow, that is really rough, especially going to the division, a division competitor like the Nats. We saw the Mets getting Juan Soto. Now the Nats last year looked fairly good compared to what a lot of people thought they were going to do, and now they're going to get the first overall pick. Most likely, I'm Ethan Holiday going to the Nats. You could say as of it right now, which looking at that future to go along with C.J. Abrams, to go along with James Wood and all those guys down there or up there at Washington, I would say they have a really bright future. The Marlins 7th overall pick, the future looking less bright. I just woke up from a nap. This is not the best way to go about it. Whoever wants to take the floor, I love all of your faces. Kevin looking disgruntled, Isaac wondering what's happened, and Sean is just zoning out in the background. I love it. Just tell me. Tell whoever wants to step first.
Would this be like the biggest drop for someone that was most likely to get number 1 or number 2? Was this the worst outcome for any team since the lottery began? Because this would show teams like, hey, you know what? You want to tank? Look what happened to the Marlins. I think this is the best example of the new rules doing what they were supposed to.
Well, you even look at the Rockies, and they didn't fall too far behind. They got the 4th pick, but they also had the Marlins.
that.
So it shows you have the best odds. You're not going to get it. And we saw it last year. I mean, I think Guardians had the 1st pick. They were towards the bottom. Same thing with the
Cleveland and Cincinnati. They were completely in the bottom.
Yep. So.
Oh,
and
well.
The had a winning record, ended up in the top 3. So.
I think the most frustrating part is the Nationals getting it. There's the cherry on top that Miami falls all the way to 7th when they had like a 50-50 shot of getting top 3. They fall all the way to 7th. And now, like Daniel mentioned, just what's going on with this division already. And the Nationals, now they're going to have the 3rd number 1 overall pick in the last, 15 years with Strasburg, Harper, and now another one. Now Ethan Holiday, most likely. It's just an absurd thing that happened tonight. But good for the Nats.
Right. And so this is bad. And it's probably worse than you think on the surface, because part of these restrictions, part of the new format is that you can't put your name in the lottery every single year. One reason why the Marlins had particularly good odds of winning this year is because the White Sox were not eligible. The Athletics were not eligible. No team, regardless of status, can get a lottery pick more than 2 consecutive years. And this is still a lottery pick, even though it's a much lower pick than they were expected. It's just next year. Next year, if we have several months in order to make up our minds about this, but it's currently constructed, the Marlins profile to be a lottery team next year. And then after that, they need to get their shit together and try to win games, because they won't even be eligible for a pick in the top 9 or 10 beyond that. The streak will be interrupted before they have to go through it again, which means that every time you're in the lottery, fingers crossed, you better get it right. The other consequence of this, I'd say the most important one, is the bonus pool money, the slot value.
Yeah.
It's lower than it would have been otherwise, because, we can grind our gears as much as possible trying to figure out what the best possible use of a draft pick is. Ultimately, it is somewhat of a crapshoot, even at the higher levels. The thing is, at least when you're assigned one of the highest picks, the corresponding money comes with it. For people that aren't familiar, there is somewhat of a limit on terms of what you can spend on a draft class before there are really prohibitive penalties that get in the way. So the highest pick comes with more assigned bonus pool money that you can spend without being taxed for it. And the difference between getting number 1 and number 7 is, based on last year, the difference is like $3.7 million, and it should be pretty similar moving forward. So it's several $1 million that, even if they weren't going to spend it on the number 1 overall guy, that's money they could have spread across their other subsequent picks in order to put together the best possible class. Just as a reminder, this past draft, Marlins ended up spending almost as much money on their 2nd pick as their 1st pick, almost as much on Carter Johnson as they did on PJ Morlando. They spread that money around, and now there's less room for creativity than they may have hoped for coming into this because of the drop off here. That's the biggest consequences, the fact that they're missing out on that pool money they were expected to get. And it just puts a lot more pressure on them to get it right with that 7th overall pick than would have been otherwise.
Yeah, and this really could have been a game changer draft for the Marlins, honestly. You look at the talent at the top, you could have got your shortstop of the future in Jackson Holiday or Jace Levet, or even an arm like Jamie Arnold if you want to go that way. But unbiased at this point, I'd say I'm not too much of a fan of the lottery. If you look at a sport like the NBA, who's had the lottery for a long time, it's much easier sport to tank in, than baseball. 82-game season compared to 162. I think baseball is a lot more unpredictable than basketball. So I'm probably just coping right now, but it really is just a shot in the heart after how the Marlins season started out, trading everyone, and then could have had like I said, we were pretty much all expecting at least a top 5 pick, and then just have the Nationals, like Isaac said, just cherry on top, a division rival after what's already happened. They already have guys like CJ Abrams, James Wood. They're stacked, and then Marlins slide down to 7. So there's still a lot of depth on this board. One of my favorite guys is Cam Tremonella from Clemson, who's 10th on a lot of bid boards right now. So there's plenty of talent, but a lot more pressure to get it right now.
Yeah, I was going to say that I feel like after pick 1 and 2, it should probably be Ethan and maybe Jace, at least on how the big boards are looking right now. I'd say the next 10 players, at least hitting wise, I'm not sure if the Marlins will go down the pitching route, but the hitting route, I would classify those players as kind of similar. So I feel like falling to 7, to me, the biggest loss is the money and the potential that next year we have to lock in and get lucky and get a real top pick like Eli mentioned. But I feel like the player drop off is not that crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it just goes to prove that even if you lose 100 games, you're not going to get the first pick. So, what is the point? Like Seattle and St. Louis get top 5 picks, and they had winning records.
They won.
They went for it at the trade deadline too. Seattle got Randy. St. Louis made their moves, and it's tough. It definitely is, but it's got to win at this point.
Moral of the story: might as well, like Kevin said, might as well go for it these days. It's just
spend some money, what the NL East is doing. So.
Before the lottery, when Miami does have a top pick, they use it on Tyler Kolek, and when they have some really attractive names on the board here, they don't win the freaking lottery. It's a disaster. But there are some very, very fun names that have been chosen 7th overall. Obviously, Clayton Kershaw was the most famous one. Matt Harvey, Mike Minor, Archie Bradley, Max Fried, who just signed for $200 million. So there's some nice superstars that haven't picked 7 overall, obviously. But that should make some guys, I guess, a little bit happier.
Yeah, I was just looking at last year.
Picks, so it's fine by me.
The Royals had the top draft lottery odds with the A's. The Royals fell down to 6. So I can tell you there. And the year before that, I believe it was the Pirates. I'll just check again. But yeah, a lot of teams falling off in that 6, 7 range. But I believe this is the fall off for the best odds to go down. So in the draft lottery era, Marlins getting that nod from going from 1st to 7th. I'm sure we'll have a lot more coverage in terms of what type of player they're going to get. As of late, the Marlins' history has not been great in the draft. Maybe with some minor exceptions as well. We'll talk about the other free agent signings and what to expect, especially with Krutchik down in Dallas. Kevin, talk to us your reactions the last, I would say, half hour or so for the Marlins, and maybe a very far outlook on what type of player they could project to get, as Sean was talking about.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you. I have no clue about this draft yet. I obviously know about Ethan Holiday and the Texas A&M player, but aside from that, not very familiar with the rest of these names. Obviously, we'll have a college season to look at them and watch them and obviously make an analysis, because the Marlins are still picking 7th. As bad as it is, they're still picking in the top 10. And it's pretty bad that with the odds that they had, they fell, but it's still a pretty good spot with the talent that is available at the end of the day. But yeah, it's tough. I mean, Juan Soto signs to the Mets. The Nationals get the 1st overall pick, and the NL East continues to get better and better. Thankfully, I guess for the Marlins, Max Fried's off to the American League, so they don't have to deal with him anymore. But yeah, it's definitely been a tough winter meetings for the Marlins so far, and it seems like there's no news. And we'll see tomorrow at the Rule 5 what happens. They lose anyone if they end up making a pick or not. So it could get worse, but I think rock bottom is today for sure.
I mean, that's harsh. Maybe. I don't know.
Right now.
It can't get worse
than this moment.
Tomorrow, I believe Ian Lewis is eligible to be chosen in the Rule 5 draft. So if they lose him, I think that will be rock bottom.
Look, Troy Johnson's up there for a 3rd straight year.
Troy Johnson is up there too. But I'm with Kevin. This really is, geez. I guess just the expectation. You were so sure that you were going to get a top 5 at the very worst, and it falls out of top 6. It's unreal to me. But
and it's funny because we're in the chat making fun of the possibility of it. And it does happen.
Wow, man. Yeah. I think something that was mentioned in the chat that we should see the balls get chosen. I think that's part of the cool thing about a lottery situation. I know they do that in the NBA, correct? I don't know. But I think that's something that should be shown on TV. Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, still, I think that's a cool thing they used to do.
Yeah. So, primarily really bad there for the Marlins. Nate, any final thoughts on this before we head into even worse thoughts about what happened in the division just last night?
There's an image, I think our good friend Alex Ferrars posted a couple times. It says, "That's so Marlins." And I think today, in the past couple weeks, that's pretty much what it's been. This has been just so Marlins. They pretty much tanked for an entire season. And like I said, it all had it lined up, and then it blew up. So just gotta hope for the best with the 7th overall pick and whatever the Rule 5 is going to entail. But yeah, I don't think it's quite rock bottom, but definitely close, definitely in that range.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe the Marlins do something right in terms of the draft. Turns out to be a great player, but again, we don't know. But to go with that, speaking of great players, last night the largest and longest deal in not just baseball history, sports history was signed within the division. The New York Mets signing Juan Soto to a 15-year, $760 million plus contract that could reach $800 million. We have not seen this type of contract in just about a year, like last year going about with Shohei Ohtani and what he signed with the Dodgers. But it's probably more surprising in terms of Juan Soto going to the Mets. The Mets have always seemed like they are a player, they're a buyer, but never can really get that type of player to come to the organization. And to get him from the Yankees, the premier organization, you could say, in baseball, and bring him to Queens. Eli, you're a New York native, boots on the ground. How are people, are Yankees fans burning jerseys and carrying stickers?
There have been a few, apparently, none that I've seen firsthand, but there have been some, as you would expect, because it's such a large fan base, such a passionate one. There have been some irrational reactions to it. But I mean, all things considered, I think this was, I wouldn't say there's a lot of shock here. This was the most likely outcome, the way that it was going to go. That you mentioned that Soto is kind of in the same ballpark as Ohtani, but I'd argue this is on a completely different stratosphere because all of it is paid during the length of the contract. There's no deferrals here. There's a chance for it to spike even more if he attempts to opt out of his contract. And then the Mets have an opportunity to give him like an extra $40 million to keep him around, and that would push it past $800 million. Like, this was such a unique case. It's really a loud statement about how much teams prioritize young players, not just super duper stars. But for a corner outfielder to get this much money, it tells you so much about his combination of production, consistency, and I think it's most of all about the youth. The fact that he just turned 26 years old, that they feel that, at least for the front end of that contract, he's worthy of being the highest paid player in baseball just because of how safe he is as a hitter and the fact that he could get better. Like, we might not have even seen the best of Juan Soto yet. It's a ridiculous deal when you try to actually analyze it. Like, it's not going to be an efficient contract for the Mets, but this is a team that sneakily is coming up on 40 years of not winning a World Series. This just speaks to how much they prioritize being great during the remainder of his prime, which is a lot of this contract, but not all of this contract. For a lot of this contract, being great during that window and giving the team a championship. And the Mets were more desperate. They prioritized that over every other team, even over the Yankees. It's a foreign concept because the Yankees always used to be in this opposite position. They used to be the team that would never let money get in the way of keeping somebody they wanted. But during this process, what was mentioned is the precedent sort of for this is actually Robinson Cano a little more than a decade ago. He was a homegrown Yankee that had an amazing career with them. They got outbid by the Mariners for Robinson Cano. The Yankees really wanted to keep Cano during the rest of his prime, and they reached a point where it was just ridiculous. They felt it was beyond reasonable. They thought it was just super inefficient when Cano left to Seattle. As it turns out, he had some good years, some bad years. He wasn't on the same caliber of player, but it was somewhat comparable in terms of that showed that the Yankees are human in this regard, that they are no longer operating as the evil empire. And so that's been the case now for over a decade now. It's not really a shock that the Yankees haven't won a World Series during that span because they've injected some reasoning into their decision-making in a way that the saying goes that if you're being rational about negotiating with free agents, you're always going to finish third in the bidding for free agents. You need to be able to step outside your comfort zone and overpay to get it done. And the Mets get it done right here. So now the question is how they fill out the rest of their team, because they're far away from having bought a World Series. They've lost so many guys potentially to free agency, the Mets have to this point. They have to replenish a lot of different positions. It just seems that they have an owner that is never going to let money get in the way of him doing that. So it's worth following what the Mets do the rest of this offseason. They still have a lot of business to attend to.
Yeah, we're joined now with Alex Krutchik, who is in Dallas, who just won this draft lottery. Alex, before we talk more about Soto and some more free agents that side, talk to you just about that lottery. How was it in the room? How was everyone there in the Marlins and Nats? How did it look in that whole process?
Yeah, it was pretty incredible. It was kind of a worst case scenario for the Marlins. The lowest they could have picked was 8. Them and the Rockies both had the highest odds of getting that first overall pick. And neither of them got it. Neither of them were even in the top 3. It was pretty shocking. It was definitely a little bit deflating. We were able to talk to Frank Pilieri right afterwards, who's the director of amateur scouting for the Marlins. And he didn't seem too concerned. Of course, it might have just been him trying to put on a brave face. But he said he listed off a list of guys that have been drafted 7th overall: Clayton Kershaw, Frank Thomas. I mentioned Braxton Garrett. Like, there's talent everywhere in this draft. And outside of Ethan Holiday, there's no consensus number 2, number 3, so on and so forth. There's talent to be had throughout the entire first round as long as you can develop. That's really what the story of the Marlins has been the last few years. It's not the lack of number 1 overall picks. It's the lack of being able to develop guys, especially position players. They've been fine with pitchers, but with position players, they have not been able to develop. There's plenty of teams that are successful right now that have not had the number 1 pick ever, or at least not in a very long time, because those teams are very good at developing. So time will tell if the Marlins have really improved their development team. This will be a good first test of that.
Yeah, to see everything going on there. I believe, Eli, you correct me, that the Marlins, if they fall again to the lottery, they won't be able to draft in the top 8, I believe, or top 10 if they go back to back. With
they get to do it one more time next year. Okay. It's the following year after that. That being a revenue, it's a difference between being a big market team and a small market team. Like the White Sox, because they're in a big market, that's why they were ineligible to have consecutive lottery picks. But as a poor club, relatively speaking, the Marlins can get 2 straight years, and then it's at 30 year where they're pushed down the same way that the A's were this year.
Yeah. To see what happens there with the Marlins. Alex, anything? What are your thoughts on this? With the Marlins getting that 7th pick, not what any of us would have hoped for this organization, but what do you think of it so far? What is your idea of the Marlins getting the 7th pick?
I think it's going to be. Here's the thing, like I said before, it all depends on who they take, but most importantly, if they can develop. Like if you take the 7th best player in the entire country and he does not turn out well, that's because you did not develop him properly. That's not because there aren't 7 great baseball players in this country in this particular draft class. I think that they have to show that they can develop better, and it'll all be fine. I would have said the same thing if they got the 1st overall pick. Like, if they had gotten the 1st overall pick and they had picked Ethan Holiday, I wouldn't be jumping around and celebrating as if, like, okay, we're saved. Everything's going to be fine now, because they still have to develop the guy, and they haven't shown that they can do that yet. So I would have had the same exact opinion as I do now. Yeah.
I think that's fair. I think in a lot of cases with the Marlins specifically, it's also come down to just picking the wrong player, or just, these players just not being very good. Like when it comes to guys like Jacob Berry, even though the whole Yelich trade return, I don't think you could blame it on lack of development with some guys, because they just couldn't hit. And there's not much you can do as a development team, but I agree with you 100%. This team, the last 5 drafts, not a single position player other than Nick Fortes, I think, has been able to sniff a major league role. So, yeah, it's a combination of both, unfortunately. It's bad development and bad players. So.
But even with that, Isaac, I do agree with you. But even with that, there were good players after Jacob Berry. So even then, it's not that they picked too low in the draft and now there's no one left.
No, right. It was right. They chose the wrong guy there, though. They chose the wrong guy.
Exactly. So I'm not so concerned with number 7 as much as I am with can they pick and develop better than they have in the last few years.
And I think we'll really know a lot about the player development side just after this season, up until July. I think Orlando is their biggest test, along with Carter Johnson and guys like that in this year's draft, and even guys like Jared Turner, who came to the organization at the deadline. We're going to know a lot about how these guys can develop. We've heard a lot about it, that they're looking forward to doing it. So I'll feel a lot more confident if we see real progression made with Orlando and Johnson, especially because they are just 18, 19-year-old guys. So, when that July comes around, that'll really be I'll feel a lot better if we can at least see a lot of progress from those two.
Well, and it's worth noting that even on the pitching side, from what we know, there's no one left there that was, back in the old regime. So you're going to have to ask yourself, how are they going to develop those guys too? A Noble Meyer and a Thomas White. I mean, I feel like those are 2 pretty good examples. They weren't around for this other regime for too long. for the most part, they're around for this one now under Bendix. So you kind of ask yourself, just how are you gonna, how do those guys kind of progress? Although, I mean, what we've seen so far is pretty damn good, at least from Thomas.
Right, I was gonna say,
What would
and
be
one
the-
of them
what
pans
would be the
out.
bigger challenge? Yeah.
But that's kind of the elephant in the room too, Kevin, because that's a great point. Like, we like to point to all these great pitchers that the Marlins have, but they're all here now, right? Like, they're all up in the majors. Who's left down there that's going to be the next baby goat? Like, you got Thomas White and Noble Meyer right now as like the two.
Patrick Monteverde's still down there, dude. What are you talking
Yeah,
about?
that's great.
You have to be a baby to do that, Kelly. You have to be able to be a baby.
I think they're hopeful for Dax. I think I don't have very high hopes for Noble, but Thomas was the main one. That is one of the best pitcher prospects in all of baseball. So I think that is your next baby goat. And then you're right. From then on, the gap in talent definitely is large.
Well, you still have a Snelling and you have a Mazer, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of arms left. There's a lot of arms left.
Now it's just a matter of, can you develop them under this new regime, I guess, if you want to even call it. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting for sure.
Eli, before we head into break really quickly, I know it's not out yet, but what was the bonus pool for the 7th overall pick last year? Just so we can maybe get an idea in terms of what the 7th overall pick last year signed, I should say.
Yeah. Well, so the bonus pool of that draft slot last year was $6.8 million. And you would expect that that's going to account for about half of the Marlins' total bonus pool. They do have a competitive balance round A pick this year. They have a higher competitive balance pick than they did last year. That's the one that falls in between the first round and the second round. So, I mean, this is all ballparking. They don't put out these official numbers until a few months from now. But I would think that slot value is going to go up a little bit to like $7 million, and that the Marlins bonus pool is going to be somewhere between 14 and 15 million, probably about $15 million. And yeah, so that would be, again, inflation is bringing all this up, but they still have a decent amount because of that competitive balance round pick that alternates from year to year. Yeah, they still have a lot to work with. And usually it'll be fascinating to see this coming out. It's just, a bummer that in terms of when we're evaluating this stuff going forward, there's a pretty wide collection of guys they could be considering, given that the obvious names at the very top of the draft are almost certainly going to be off the board.
Yeah. And I think with that, Eli, it's a perfect time to go ahead and do a little bit of our special edition Flip Fish with a certain superstar part of it.
Yeah, Juan Soto inspired Flip Fish. During the season, of course, we choose somebody that played for the Marlins and the opposing team that they're facing in the upcoming series. In this case, we got to get creative when we do the offseason streams. And given the Juan Soto news, there were maybe a dozen or so guys to choose from here that played with Soto in either Washington, San Diego, or New York, and guys that also played for the Marlins at various points in their careers. I went split down the middle. I think this is like a 5 out of 10 in terms of difficulty for a former relief pitcher. One that I guess a hint is his age is a pretty big hint. A 40-year-old right-handed pitcher who pretty nice career, 6.9 WAR, mainly out of the bullpen, just one start in between right there. As you can see, not a strikeout guy, 335 strikeouts compared to those 478 in the third innings pitched. Played with Soto at one point in his career and played with the Marlins when Soto wasn't there, obviously.
Debuted in 2010. When the hell could he have? Jeez. No, not Annabelle, obviously.
Yeah, well, think it over a little bit as a brief interlude instead of a commercial, and as a favor to our host, we're going to share this teaser that the Marlins put out about their upcoming collaboration with Flanagan's.
Don't be suspicious. 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 Don't be suspicious.
John Ralphio?
Don't.
Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah, I didn't make that. Just sharing it.
The Marlins are signing the Green Flanagan Cup.
That's the biggest news of the offseason, fellas.
I don't know. It's not Rodney. Rodney's a decent guess.
Yeah, I was going to say, is it Rodney
Robertson? Not bad.
But this is a shorter career than Rodney had.
I thought it was
Ziegler. It's not Ziegler either.
Did he play on the 2020 Marlins?
This player did play on the 2020 Marlins.
What is it, James Hoyt? No.
Oh, is it Brandon
Brandon
Kinsler?
Kinsler. Brandon
Kinsler.
Kinsler.
Oh, he was so good that year. Fuck. So good.
He went to the Phillies after, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, we were all going crazy because the Phillies signed him for like $10,000 more than what the Marlins offered, apparently, or something, and he was terrible.
Yes, it was very controversial when the Marlins, they had a club option for him in 2021, and it seemed a really cheap, no-brainer club option. They turned it down. He ended up signing with the Phillies for a similar amount. Pretty bitter about that. And then he's pretty much done after that. He did not do well with the Phillies. He was hurt a lot. We barely pitched with them. But he made good memories during that short season. That
I was gonna say
a reminder, those 2020 stats, the farther we get away from them, the more insane they are. That Miggy Rowe was an elite hitter, and that all the guys that struggled that weren't supposed to struggle as well.
Brian Anderson, home run king. People forget that.
That's a stud. 3 home run day.
But let's go ahead and talk about another draft that's happening very soon, and actually tomorrow. We go from the Marlins getting the 7th pick to tomorrow Marlins having the 3rd pick in the Rule 5 draft. We've done a lot of previews here on FOF to talk about who the Marlins could potentially draft, maybe players they could potentially lose as well. But Kevin, talk to us, give us a little bit of an insight in the Rule 5 draft. Marlins picking 3rd. Do you even project them to select a player?
Yeah, I think they will. Yesterday they released Mike Baumann, who ended up signing, I think, Korea or Japan somewhere overseas. Yeah, so who cares? So yeah, they're probably gonna make a pick. I think it'll be a pitcher. Now it's just a matter of, do you go starter? Do you go reliever? More of a swing man? Never hurts to have, someone there. And it needs to be noted that whoever they do choose needs to be on the 26-man roster from start to finish, unless he is injured. He cannot be sent down, so he is basically there on the roster. For example, Nasim Nunez made it a full season on the Nationals roster.
Mm-hmm.
The Rays, in years past, and I say the Rays because that's where Peter was, they passed the pick, but this is a pretty high pick. I think the highest since like 2019. So I do expect them to make the pick. There's a lot of names out there. It's not as flashy of a class as in years past when you would think that it would be a good one. Yeah, Blaze Jordan's the highlight name, I guess. He wasn't great this last season, but I don't think they take a hitter. There's no real need to take a hitter. I think you have enough at the major league, in the minors. And I think you look at Ryan Webb on the Guardians. I believe that will most likely be the first pick if they make a pick. But hopefully, for the Marlins case, he drops down to Brandon Young, kind of a swing man, 92 mile per hour fastball. Yeah, there we go. Krutchik wrote about Brian Magdaleno. Yeah. He also wrote about Jack Hartman, who I believe is a two-way guy from what I saw. And then Sean wrote about Evan Reifert. So 2 Tampa Bay guys who wouldn't be shocked if Peter takes him, just given his familiarity with them. And then some other guys who are kind of wild cards that have been spoken about a lot. Young really hasn't, but wouldn't be surprised if he's taken, just given the swingman ability. So, the Marlins take a pitcher. They've done this multiple times before off of waivers. So you're just doing it on the draft. And, it's a little more high pressure given you have to keep them on the roster. But if things don't work out, you send them back and you kind of eat a little bit of some money. But look, overall, the Marlins have had some sort of success in the Rule 5. Eliezer for a couple of years, he was there. Never forget the 2020 season. And Zach Pop was the guy they traded to the Blue Jays. Ended up trading him for Groshans. Well, that ended up not great, but they had their success.
That was sick.
5. Yeah, right. Yeah, they've had their success in the Rule 5, thankfully.
Dane Myers, but that was the minor league.
Dane Myers, the minor league portion.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So a couple of things I want to touch on. One is to reiterate something that Kevin mentioned that I think is the easiest way to explain it. A Rule 5 draft pick is essentially a glorified waiver claim. It's claiming somebody and they don't have options to use during that first year. The difference is these guys tend to be younger. These guys have no major league experience. Blaze Jordan, for example, he's 21 years old. He turns 22 next week. Most of these guys are in their earlier mid-20s because they've just reached the minimum threshold in terms of how long you can hold on to them in the minors without protecting them on your 40-man roster. And these guys were left unprotected. But it's a glorified waiver claim. These guys, if you bring them in and you hold on to them through the season, you're paying them major league money, major league minimum. You need to find a way to hold on to them and make use of them during that season. It is a lot easier to do with a pitcher than a hitter. The Nasim Nunez example was crazy last year, where he basically played nothing at all for the first 4 months of the year. And then at the end of the year, they started mixing him a little bit more, but he played it in such a tiny fraction of their games, almost all of them as a reserve. It's so hard to run a team, even if you're a bad team. It's so hard to actually make that work if you're going to bury a guy completely on the bench. And on the pitching side, it's a little bit easier to bury these guys in low leverage situations. So use them as a mop up guy, at least initially at the start of the year. And then they have success, then it's great. You move them into a bigger role. But like, they could basically treat these guys the way that they would Sixto entering last year, where Sixto was pitching like once a week. And then out of desperation, they had to move him into the rotation. And then a couple months into the year, they gave up on him. But you really shouldn't consider these guys that much different than some of the waiver claims that worked out last year, some of the waiver claims that didn't work out last year. If it doesn't work out, you just offer them back to their previous team. And they'll usually take that player back if they feel there's some value left in there. Unlike the lottery, I should point out, their draft position was not affected by the lottery. This is straight reverse standings. So the Marlins had the third worst record in baseball last year. That is why they have the number 3 pick in this Rule 5 instead of number 7. So you can breathe easily knowing that they didn't fall suddenly due to ping pong balls in this Rule 5 pick. They get close to the top of their preference right here. The fact that they made that move with Mike Baumann, the timing that they made it, it really signals strongly that they're going to make a selection right here. Why do that right now? Why wait to this very moment to clear that roster spot unless they were going to make a pick? So it seems almost certain that they are going to choose somebody, and we expect it to be a pitcher of some kind. It might not be on this list. We have 5 candidates right here. It could be, there's so many guys to choose from across the big leagues that were left unprotected that they can bring into their organization.
Yeah, the Marlins also have guys who are left unprotected. I think the big one, I guess, for the Marlins would be Ronnie Simon, who they literally signed like a month or 2 ago, surprisingly unprotected. So maybe a team takes a chance on that. I mean, they did with Nasim, so I can't be shocked anymore.
The one that sticks out to me in terms of one that maybe gets selected, it wouldn't be like a big loss, but last year in the 2 years ago in the minor league phase, the Marlins got Austin Roberts, this reliever that spent last year in AA and AAA. He had a lot of success down there. He pitched in the DR this winter and did pretty decently. So he just has the makings of a solid middle reliever, if not a little bit more. He's 26 or something like that at this point. Maybe another team picks him. He was left unprotected. The Marlins only chose to protect Dax Fulton, Davison De Los Santos, and Jared Cerna. All those were, we covered that, I think, on the previous stream. Those interesting decisions that they made right there. But in terms of the rest, if perhaps they get sniped by one of those guys in their system, it wouldn't be that big of a loss. The obvious guys they accounted for.
Yeah, to be very interesting there. Sean, I want to hear your thoughts on terms of the Rule 5 draft for the Marlins and maybe what selection you think the Marlins will most likely take.
Yeah, kind of just to echo what Kevin and Eli were saying, he's probably going to be a pitcher, like Eli was saying. Why would they release Bonham now, 2 days before the Rule 5 draft, specifically a pitcher? I just don't see, like how Kevin was saying, any real space for a hitter right now on the major league roster, just because you have to keep him the whole entire season, theoretically, unless you release him. Doesn't really make sense for the Marlins to do that. So it'll probably be a pitcher. I mean, there's a couple other pitchers that were on that list that are potential picks. I know there's 2 other Rays, like this guy Keyshawn Askew, who's a lefty. I know the Marlins might be looking for a lefty in their bullpen. So yeah, it's probably going to be a reliever of some sort, and I hope for our sake that it's someone on the list, because that would be pretty cool.
Yeah. You know what else is pretty cool? Going to Dallas for the winter meetings. Alex, I want to talk to you about your experience there, what you've seen so far, quotes you've had, rumors you're hearing. Just tell us the overall experience being at the winter meetings and maybe what else we can expect from you coming up.
Yeah, it's been pretty cool. It's very cool to be in a hotel that feels as big as a resort or a small city. It's packed in here. It took me like 15 minutes to walk from the media workroom to the ballroom where the lottery was being held. So that was cool. It's cool to be amongst a bunch of other baseball people of all different backgrounds. Like, yeah, you have some coaches and executives walking around, but you also have media members, and you have all different kinds of media members. You got TV, radio, print. You got international guys. It just feels like a big baseball fest. Like on top of just the coverage that I've been providing, it's just been a fun experience to be able to talk baseball with guys. Like there's certain conversations I've had that aren't quite I don't want to say good enough, but aren't quite they don't capture the attention of people enough for me to write a story about it, but still incredible information to have. I've gotten to speak with the director of catching. I got to speak with Carson Vitale, the new bench coach, of course Clayton McCullough, the new manager. We're going to be able to talk to Peter Bendix tomorrow, which tomorrow will probably be the day that we get the most information from all these meetings. I know people are sick of not having more info from the Marlins camp, but yeah, it's been fun. Just learning, getting to pick the brains of certain baseball people has been super fun.
I mean, you're there, so may as well ask you the report with Luzardo. I mean, there's different ways to look at it. Just with he was hurt, only pitched in 12 games, didn't look great in almost any of them. He had one or two good starts, but seems like to get a starting pitcher in the free agent market, it's going to cost you some big bucks. So maybe trading for one wouldn't hurt you all too much. And obviously, you're in the same room as John Morosi, who made that report. So just what have you been hearing around there, the rumblings of Luzardo, and do you think something gets done?
Yeah, I haven't been able to get a true gauge on what the market is for him and what the price would be for him. I do know that teams have checked in, but I think that's all it's been so far is just checking in. And it's been the case with Luzardo for the last year and a half. Teams like him a lot. He's one of the pitchers that gets talked about the most when it comes to getting traded away from Miami. I'm getting the vibe that it's probably not going to happen this offseason. I wouldn't be surprised if something does happen at the trade deadline, depending on how his health is and depending on if he can avoid regressing from his 2023 season. I know he didn't look great in 2024, but he was also pitching between multiple injuries. Again, I haven't gotten a whole lot of opinions on him enough to confidently say what will happen, but that's the general vibe that I'm getting from the conversation that I have had.
Yeah, I want to remind people that last winter meetings that Luzardo was at the time when Luzardo was also in trade rumors as well. That it got pretty heated in terms of with the Royals or with the Orioles. Those were the names that the teams that were most closely associated with him. That would be selling high. That was an interesting debate because I think everybody recognized that his value was peaking at that time with 3 full years of control, coming off a very rare injury-free season. And then, but I think most people understood that given the context, the way that the team performed the previous year, how distasteful it would have been to flip him for prospects or to flip him for unestablished talent and give the team no chance of being competitive. And then as it turns out, they wanted to revisit it at the trade deadline this past season. And on paper, you would think that he would still have considerable value. And it's just that real-timed injury with his back that sidelined him and gave him no chance to contribute down the stretch. At the same time, now we're at the other end of the spectrum because of the uncertainty coming off that bad year that he had. It feels like this would be selling low. That potentially the concern is that it might not be. The concern is that if he comes out next year and he's throwing 92, 93 mile per hour fastballs and he's like a middling starter and he has a elbow scare midway through, you just never know with pitchers. It's that balancing act between how much you trust them to bounce back versus how worried are you about the risk that they have. So even at this moment, I think he does have considerable value just because of the financial aspect of it. He's going to make somewhere in the ballpark of $6 million this upcoming year. Whereas Max Fried, who's better than Luzardo, how much better is he than when Luzardo's at the peak of his performance? It's probably not a $200 million difference in commitments. The difference between what these starters get, not just the high-end starters, but even the back-end guys, they make several multiples more than Luzardo is in line for. And so that's going to make him really desirable, and other teams are going to be willing to bet on that injury aspect of it as well, even if they make the deal now. But I do still lean the same way that you do, that they bring it into the year, give him a chance to actually perform on the mound, understanding that fingers crossed that if he stays relatively healthy, or if he's simply healthy leading up to the deadline and performing well, that's kind of all teams need to see in order to make a big investment at the deadline. I mean, the sad part of it is that it does seem inevitable one way or another that he's going to get traded. And that's disappointing for a guy whose career really took off after getting traded to Miami, who obviously has South Florida ties. It's a bummer that it feels so inevitable. It's just that when you have 2 years of control left and you don't feel supremely confident about the team being competitive in either of those 2 years, that's how you lead to this situation where it just doesn't line up that well.
And you kind of would have wished that a lot of these guys had a healthy season, because it seems like in the market right now, I mean, the Marlins would kind of thrive, honestly, with what they could get with some of these guys. If Luzardo had a pretty good season and made a lot more starts than he would have, you could have been looking at a situation where, man, you probably could get some really good pieces for Luzardo when you're hearing the names Dylan Cease on the market. And I think there was another one that was mentioned as well on the market there. And Boston's still looking for a pitcher. Corbin Burns maybe going to get just as much as Fried, maybe a little less, who knows, just because of his age. But, I mean, it's definitely a tough situation because you only had Brax make a couple of starts. He would have been a nice guy to trade. I don't think they're going to deal Weathers away. Sandy, obviously, we've seen the reports that he's not getting traded anytime soon. Yuri is just bottom, low value. There's no value there at all. So, yeah, it sucks. It definitely does. But, I mean, 2025 deadline is certainly going to be, I think, a very interesting time when you're going to hear a lot of Luzardo and Alcantara, at least.
I was going to say not anytime soon, but I hope you mean just the next couple of months, because I don't think he finishes the year with the Marlins. With Luzardo, I wonder, obviously trading him now would be selling extremely low, but if he has a really good spring training enough for a team to acquire so they get 2 full regular seasons of him, do you think that would open up the door a little bit if he just goes out and shows that he's healthy in spring training this year?
Because if he has a nice spring training. Go ahead, Chris.
And sorry, Gavin. And that's part of what I'm asking around here is like, is the issue with Luzardo that people are worried that he won't, that he's more of his 2024 production than his 2023 production? Or do they know that he's good? They just want to make sure he's healthy. If they know that he's good, they just want him to be healthy, then a good spring training means that he might get like the John Birdie treatment where like 2 days before opening day, he's out.
Right. I mean, I don't remember a trade like that with someone of Luzardo's caliber, but I think teams are definitely worried about the injury part more. So I think he's proved it enough that Jesus Luzardo, when he is healthy, is one of the better southpaws in baseball. And you also have to argue in spring training. You can't really trust Grapefruit League stats much, but I think, like I said, the velocity's there. Maybe that opens the door to a potential March trade, which would be good for the Marlins. That way they get more value for him because it'll be 2 full regular seasons that they'll be giving up instead of just 1.5.
Exactly. I think that'd be the most ideal, to be honest. I'm sorry, Kevin. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, okay. It really just makes you think of every time I hear Luzardo in trade rumors. It brings me back to July when the package that the Marlins got for Trevor Rogers, who is much lower level than Luzardo, guys like Norby and Stowers. And I think teams would still be that level of desperate either now or you want to wait till spring training to see if he's healthy. So I think if his velocity is 95 or around there by the time I think if you get a package that is around a Norby Stowers type one, you have to let it go, I think.
Mm-hmm. It is interesting that this report comes out now because you would think, with the injury, not many, maybe teams would check in to see if they could lowball the Marlins, but I don't think the Marlins are that dumb, hopefully, to do that. So it is interesting. Maybe a lot of teams are calling and, they are willing to maybe overpay a little bit for Luzardo to have him on the roster instead of paying $200 million for a pitcher like we saw today, and we're likely going to see really soon with Corbin Burns and whoever's left on the market. So it definitely, you can look at it from both ways, and I think I do agree with you guys as well, where you go to spring training, Luzardo's hitting 95, 96, and he's looking really good. You trade him, and you would probably get some pretty decent return as well for someone like Luzardo with, as Isaac said, 2 full years of control. You don't really get that nowadays with Miami, especially trying to trade him this early. At this point, it's just the arbitration stuff. That's kind of why they're going to trade him. But
it just makes it it makes it burn a little bit knowing the value that obviously we spoke about this already. Just knowing the value Luzardo had this time last year. I was cooking up a Luzardo for Volpe trade. He just had so much, and the Marlins they couldn't have thought that they were going to be very good in 2024. They could have just dealt him at that point. They traded Arise 1 month into the season. I'm sure that if they could have that back, they would have dealt him because they could have gone to King's ransom for Luzardo last year, but.
3 years of control. I mean, you don't get that.
3
anymore.
years. That's why him for Volpe straight up was, and ironically, I think as of today, if Luzardo's healthy, it's still a fair trade. Both their values have gone down a little bit, and I think today would be a fair trade, Luzardo for Volpe. Ironically,
I think it's a good idea, Isaac. I completely agree. I think Luzardo last offseason completely peaked in value. I don't think even if he comes out, even if we keep him for half the season and he looks even better than the 2023 Luzardo, I mean, just because of the team control, his value's not going to be there. I think it's right. I mean, I wasn't, here with you guys, but I remember thinking that, look, I don't think it was that hard to tell. We weren't going to be very good. The Marlins weren't going to be very good in 2024. I think that was the time to trade Luzardo, but he's still going to have good value, like you guys said. He's still a nasty lefty, and if he shows flashes of 2023, we're going to get a good deal. So
What I want to point out is you guys brought up the potential of spring training timing, and the comp that came to mind from this past spring was Dylan Cease. He was traded in the middle of March. He was traded after making 3 spring training starts for the White Sox. Now with him, health wasn't a question, but in terms of the timing, where if you're a team that you're in this unfortunate situation where this guy's an obvious trade candidate, he also had 2 years of control. So I don't want to compare the returns because that kind of seems like a best case scenario to get what the White Sox got in return for Cease. That was like a 3-player package, 4-player package headlined by a Drew Thorpe of the Padres. In terms of timing, that one went down on March 13th of last year, just a couple of weeks before opening day. So in this case, there's like some fairly recent precedent in terms of teams willing to make a substantial change to their rotation. I mean, especially if a team that's interested in him loses some of their starting depth during spring training. So while it's an opportunity for Luzardo to prove that he's healthy, it works the other way around, where as soon as you report to spring training, everybody shows up at spring training and you can dream about all the depth that you have. And the Marlins were the perfect example last year. You get to the end of spring training and all of a sudden that strength of your team is a weakness. So the Marlins are looking to make a deal with the 2025 version of the Marlins that show up to spring and they're all depleted, and it gives them more incentive to make a deal now in order to get a full year of control. The last thing I'd point out is just keep an eye out for all the teams in the bidding for these free agent starters that don't get those starters. I mean, naturally, those teams that weren't comfortable spending what the free agents are going to take, their natural pivot is to go to the trade market for somebody like him. But I'll just reiterate that I would think even spring training is more likely than happening right now, just because how much the perception of him changes if he's able to, in a measurable way, show that he's back to 100% or pretty close to it.
And another example, I think you mentioned Cease. I think Sean Manaea was traded from the Athletics to San Diego during spring training. He literally made a start like the next day against them, I think it was. If I recall, that was a couple years back now. But I think, before Cease, that was another one that I think comes to mind. But I mean, another name to keep in mind, I don't think Luzardo's going anywhere until Garrett Crochet goes somewhere, So
it was very early in the season. It was April 3rd.
Okay.
Very early in the season, basically right when camp broke.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one. It's in the Marlins' best interest, obviously, just to state the obvious that they should not be trading him this winter.
Definitely not. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would have been a potential prediction time topic, but I think we're all kind of aligned in terms of whether he gets traded or not during the meetings and something like that.
Yeah. As our last topic, I wanted to discuss just your guys' overall thoughts so far in free agency overall for baseball. It seems like there are a lot of mega deals happening. You have Max Fried getting 200 plus, Willie Adames, I believe, getting 180. Juan Soto almost $800 million. Yimi Garcia getting $15 million, which might be the biggest surprise of them all. But what do you guys think so far of this free agency? Tyler O'Neill getting $50 million. Overall, what do you think this free agency is going for baseball? Are players getting a little bit overpaid, underpaid? How do you guys believe it's going?
I'm happy that we're getting these deals done now and not going into spring training. I'm glad that nonsense seems to be over. I'm glad that it's happening at the winter meetings, or at least right before it, or maybe right after it. I missed having the hot stove in the middle of winter. I hated going into spring training, and like certain big name guys don't even have a team yet. I always thought that was pretty ridiculous. So I'm glad that we're getting these now.
No.
Yeah, like Harper, like Machado, they didn't sign until teams reported to spring training. I hadn't thought about the Soto deal. Almost 800. It really was almost $800 million. Then
It is if they buy the opt out.
Right. And so just what stood out to me is because it was just 10 years ago that the largest contract in North American sports history was Giancarlo Stanton. 13 years. It was an extension, not a free agent deal. 13 years, 325. And since then, there have been 10 more that have crushed that record. And it's just crazy the amount of money on being spent on these marquee free agents. Because honestly, there hasn't been since Alex Rodriguez, a free agent as young and as talented as Juan Soto. There's never been a player like Shohei Ohtani. So I guess that's sort of, you combine that with the amount of money the league is making, and there you go. You have two $700 million contracts in back-to-back off seasons, and it's cool. I just remember when the Marlins had that title for a good while. The largest contract.
A's are signing players. The A's signed $70 million, which is basically $700 for them.
That photo of Luis Severino seeing where he was going to play in the next couple of years was just gold. And him saying, what did he say the reason was? Oh, because of how good the Athletics were. That's right. Oh, yeah. He's a funny guy.
Everyone knows the Athletics are everyone's destination.
Yeah, maybe better than the Marlins.
Even though we don't necessarily know where the destination is. Right now, it's in West Sacramento.
Sacramento's beautiful.
No, but it's also crazy, not just those numbers that you just mentioned, Isaac. The fact that the Mets did it. Like the fact that the Yankees can't just throw money around to anyone who they want anymore. Like they've got a guy 10 miles away who's probably crazier than Steinbrenner in terms of how much money he's willing to deal out to guys. It's just incredible. Correct? Are Scherzer and DeGrom still on their payroll? I know that was a big deal last year. Like most of their payroll was guys that didn't play for them anymore. Is that still the case?
Yeah, Scherzer at least I know.
I think both of them, because they both got traded for one prospect, and those the money.
I think Scherzer's like another 50, I believe, something like that, something crazy.
Yeah, if I'm Hal Steinbrenner, I'm very scared of this madman in Queens that seems to just not care at all about money and just wants the best guys over there.
Yeah, it's just the third signing for the Mets, just free agency as well. They signed Montes and they signed Clay Holmes, who they want to make a starter. So they're still going. I'm sure they'll have at least a couple more moves as well.
Yeah, at this rate,
Pete Alonso is still pending.
And at this rate, the Mets probably going to be your division winner unless the Phillies one up them some way somehow. But I mean,
you don't believe Jordan Romano is the tipping point?
I don't know. I still think the Mets
there. This might be wrong. But according to Spotrac, Verlander nor Scherzer are on their payroll anymore.
Yeah, I'm looking at that too. They're not there. The only non-active players that they're paying, obviously Bobby Bonilla, Adam Ottavino, and Brett Saberhagen. The deferred payroll.
I don't want to turn this negative. I just want to get people prepared that the way that Steve Cohen is going about this business, I don't know how his fellow owners feel about it. In fact, I would venture that they are not too happy with the fact that he is overpaying to get some of these players and pressuring them there to overpay to get those same players as well. It's great for the sport in the meantime, as long as owners are willing to engage in that friendly competition. But they've already amended the previous CBA to make a Steve Cohen tax, to make the luxury tax penalties harsher, to discourage him from doing this, and he still does it as well. I do, looking ahead 2 more years when they have to redo the CBA again. I'm just really curious to see what the ramifications are in terms of owners kind of revolting against it, in terms of owners, the majority of them, the ones that can't even dream about being involved forget Soto, but even like a Max Fried type and stuff like that. The fact that now the majority of baseball teams, when they cannot reasonably afford, or they say they don't think they can afford top tier players in their prime of their careers. They just aren't willing to make the same investment that Steve Cohen is. I just wonder whether we reach a point where there's real animosity between these groups, and it gets in the way of actually putting together a new CBA and moving forward with baseball. And you just worry about the potential for some kind of labor stoppage if there's this big disconnect in terms of a few owners willing to pay players a certain amount of money, and all the other ones feeling that that's not a reasonable way to spend their money. That always is what could get in the way of a sport that I think is generally heading in the right direction. If there's just this really complicated mess in terms of what players should be making, and how do we have a system where the competitive balance is still intact. For the moment, the competitive balance is still in a great spot, in my opinion, across the sport. I mean, the Mets have spent, not just this year, I mean, in the since Steve Cohen took over, they've spent copious amounts of money, and it hasn't even got them to a World Series yet. So there still is a whole lot that you can do as a baseball organization to make your players better or to not make them better that goes outside of what happens on the major league payroll.
That's what I've been saying for years, Eli. I know the last two teams that have won a World Series happen to also be the teams that were big spenders, but that's an outlier. For years, a couple of decades now, money hasn't actually bought championships. It's bought relevancy. Of course, the Yankees are always going to be good. The Dodgers are always going to be good. But you still have to develop around the margins. I don't think the Mets are World Series favorites yet.
No, I don't even think they're division favorites.
Yeah, that's the other thing. They could lose the division. Juan Soto's going to be great. They're going to be a lot better next year than they were this year, but I don't know if it'll actually amount to a World Series. The Yankees spent all that money, and they looked futile in the World Series. It wasn't even a competitive series, really. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think the money buys you some stuff, but it doesn't buy you a championship.
Yeah. Just look at the Guardians season. Look at the Tigers season. I guess just look at the Central teams.
What the Orioles have been doing the last couple of years too.
Yeah, the Diamondbacks last year.
Yeah, Diamondbacks made the World Series. But they also I think the main component that those teams, those successful stories do is extend their good players. Like it's Marte.
Exactly.
And that's something that the Marlins have shown zero inclination on doing. I don't think they will, even with a prime candidate in Yuri Perez. They could probably get him for a little bit lower than face value right now. I've heard
they could
no
get him for that Sandy deal, maybe even lower, just because of the injury too.
Look at the franchise.
Yeah.
Sorry, Daniel. Look at the franchise. Look at the franchise that we cover. They've spent money before, and it got them nowhere. Like you said, Isaac, it's about extensions. Not to be I know being a Peter Bendix defender is not exactly in fashion among a lot of Marlins fans, but I don't think not spending in free agency is the problem here. I think that the Marlins' problem since before Bendix got here, long before Bendix got here, since 1998, it's not spending in free agency. It's not extending guys when they deserve it. So in a couple of years, when it's time to possibly pay a Jake Berger type or Yuri or, I think Sandy's probably gone, but it would be nice if he could be on this list of guys that I'm naming. That's where he'll set himself apart. Can you be loyal to the guys that got you to this point instead of just blowing it up every 5 years?
Yeah, and you say that the Marlins spend money that got them nowhere. Well, I'm not even going to count 2012 because that was just a weird year. But when they did spend money, 15 and 16, because they did, they acquired a lot of players, they extended a lot of players. They were good, they were decent, they were relevant. That was the best years for the Marlins in the Marlins Park era. So it does get you somewhere. You have to spend. You have to, whether you acquire players via trade on free agency, you have to do that as well, at least a little bit, like they did in those 15 and 16 years when they would sign acquire the Michael Morses, and even though they didn't turn out, try it a little bit because it did help a lot. Dan Herron.
I guess I'm talking about the big splashes because for every Michael Morse and Dan Herron, you also bring in a Wei-Yin Chen and Avi Garcia. So it's really
bad. They were bad right when they signed those guys. We knew that was going to turn out bad. Michael Morse maybe is really good. Jeff Baker maybe really good.
Right.
Pete Gordon really good.
Sign guys at the lower and mid-level contracts. Mostly lower.
Well, you look now recently. Yesterday, I was watching the MLB Network show, and you have the A's GM talking about extending a Brent Rooker, extending more guys. It's like the A's are doing it, you can't. Well, it's crazy to think about. I mean, they just paid Luis Severino, as you guys mentioned, and now they're trying to extend their best player, Brent Rooker.
Yeah, I think with that, going over an hour to discuss everything. With no moves for the Marlins, a disappointing draft lottery, and just rumors upon rumors, and maybe the biggest news coming between the Florida Panthers and the Marlins. But I think that's going to be enough for this edition of FOF Live. For myself, Daniel, Kevin, Nate, Eli, Isaac, Sean, Alex, and Dallas, this is FOF Live presented by you super subscribers. Thank you, and go Fish.
Have a wonderful evening.